Welcome to this episode of the Strong Kind podcast. This episode is with Amber Grimmett. Amber is a postpartum and pregnancy fitness specialist. This episode starts off with her talking about her own traumatic birth journey, and it's pretty wild. It's worth the listen. So appreciate you being here. Please check out this episode, rate and like and subscribe to the podcast, and thanks so much for being here. All right, so let's jump in though. We'll start with you, and then we'll talk about mental health and that
Yep.
type of stuff. So just tell me, I don't know a ton of detail, and I don't know how you want to get into it, but you had
I'm
kind of a
open to
traumatic,
whatever,
yeah,
so
you had like a traumatic birth experience, which has
I did.
probably been a fuel for your fire theoretically. So tell me about that if you
Well,
don't
I'm
mind.
gonna go back even further then, because I'm gonna
Yes,
start with
please, yes,
Emmys because
please.
Emmys was traumatic in itself.
Okay,
So if we go back to 2019, I got pregnant with Emmy. So I had Emmy July of 2019. And at the time, I was just kind of dabbling in pregnancy postpartum coaching. I was full-time dental hygienist at the time. But I knew I wanted to do something related to moms and fitness, but I had no clue what that looked like. So got pregnant with Emmy, planned for a fully natural birth. I was working with midwives, all was going great. I lifted my entire pregnancy, felt awesome. Really no complications at all until her 35-week appointment. They found that she was breech. And so they are like, okay, you have basically 2 weeks to do everything you possibly can to get her to flip. So
all
I'm
right,
like
yeah. So
hanging
let's
upside down.
explain. I know what it is, but I also kind of can't totally conceptualize
Yes.
it. So explain a breech birth to people.
Okay. So ideally, around 35, 36 weeks, baby goes head down. So head goes down into the pelvis, right? Emmy was the opposite. So her head sat under my right rib cage pretty much the entire pregnancy. So like this was me most of the pregnancy. So head was under my ribs, feet were straight down in my pelvis. So she was completely the opposite of what they wanted. And ideally, there's very few providers that are comfortable delivering breech. So you want baby's head down. So my options were to naturally get her to flip. So go head down. Or I could go in at 37 weeks and they could manually flip her externally. Okay. So I tried everything I possibly could to get her to flip. Nothing worked. So we were with midwives. We had to meet with an OB, met with an OB, and we went in for the consult. He was super confident he could get her to flip. He's like, I've been doing this for 30 years. And all the years I've only ever had one end in an emergency C-section that day. And I was like, okay, those are pretty good odds. Cy and I are first-time parents. And so we go in for it's called an ECV. It's where they manually try and flip them. We go in at 30, I think I was 36 weeks and 5 days at the time. So I had my mini hospital bag. We had no car seat in the car. Cy didn't bring a bag. Like we're not planning on having a baby. I'm supposed to be back at work at noon. They start flipping her. They get her halfway. And my midwife happened to be on call. So she was there. And so she was like, you know what? It's been a while since we've checked on baby. Like, let's check baby really quick. So they get the little ultrasound thing, right? And they're like, listen for baby's heartbeat. Can't find her heartbeat. So they flip me to my right side, still can't find her heartbeat. Flip her to my left side. All these alarms start going off. They're calling the OB or calling the OR, get an anesthesiologist. I'm like, what is happening? So long story short, we end up in emergency C-section. They ruptured my placenta. So the umbilical cord and the placenta ruptured. So that's why we lost Emmy's heart rate. She was fine in the end. I was fine. So this is what then led to my whole thing with Bo. So I had a C-section with Emmy, which meant in Washington State, there are pretty much no providers that will do or midwives, excuse me, that will do a vaginal birth after cesarean. So I had to go with OBs, which is nothing against OBs. I just tend to prefer the experience you have with midwives. So this is what really catapulted what my birth would look like with Bo. So now you want me to jump into Bo's?
I'm just I'm having a nervous breakdown. And this is post, and I know it all turns out okay. Yeah, so go into Bose now.
Okay, so I should back up a little bit too. So after Emmys, this is what catapulted my business. So after my experience with Emmy, the lack of knowledge I felt like I had, I really, if we go back and reflect on it, I really feel like I got bullied into the decision that we made to have the ECV with Emmy because Cy and I both, excuse me, I said Bo, Cy and I were really against it in the beginning because I had done a lot of research and didn't feel comfortable with the decision because I had an anterior placenta. So most of the time the placenta is on the backside. So towards mom's spine, right? Mine
Hmm.
was on the front, so mine was belly side, and
Hmm.
we knew that was higher risk for the placental abruption, which is what happened.
So basically, when he was trying to flip Emmy
Yep.
in there, the placenta basically detached,
Yep.
right? So,
Yep.
okay,
Yep. So
yeah,
if you
and
picture my belly here, right? My
yeah,
placenta sat right here and her head
yeah,
was right here. So they're pushing as hard as they can with their hands. And so when they pushed,
yeah,
they detached it, which has made her heart rate drop.
yeah. Mm,
Yeah. So this all happened. And so I'm recovering from a C-section. Granted, I'm married to a PT, so I had some guidance, but I went in for my 6-week appointment and I was like, okay,
I'm sure Sai's a great postpartum
exactly.
guide.
Because he knows everything about postpartum, right? So we go into my 6-week appointment with this OB who I'd only had literally one appointment with and then the ECV because I had midwives the whole pregnancy, right? I go in to see him and I'm like, okay, I've only been walking and like hardly doing anything. Like I'm cleared, right? What can I start doing now? And he looks at me and he looks at my husband and he's like, well, he's a PT. Whatever he says you can do, that's what you can do. And I was just like, oh my God, this is the care that all women are getting. So anyway, that's what then started Fierce Not Fragile, my business, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so now with Bo, I was determined to have a VBAC, which is called, that's a vaginal birth after cesarean. So, depending on the reason that you ended up with a C-section, most women, it's safer and more beneficial to have a vaginal birth the second time versus a repeat C-section. If you actually look at the statistics on the wrist, it's actually a lot safer to do that. So, that was my goal. So, of course, at this point, I was already running my business. I took every possible birth course certification, read every book, every podcast you could possibly think of in preparation for Bo's birth. Felt really well prepared. So, oh gosh, it was 39 and 5 weeks, 39 weeks and 5 days with Bo. Pregnancy had gone super well, literally not one complication, super healthy. Again, I stayed active the whole time. Bo was good. 39 weeks and 5 days, my water broke. Sai made me laugh. He said some stupid dad joke. I laughed really hard. Honestly, was convinced I peed myself, but I was like, that's never really happened during this pregnancy. That's kind of weird. So I got up, ran to the bathroom, of course, sat down the toilet, and I was like, oh, this is not pee. This is much more than pee because water just kept going
Hmm.
everywhere. But I had no contractions at all, literally none. So we ended up finding out that I also had, there's an actual name that's not going to come to me, but a ridiculous amount of amniotic fluid. So my water broke at 9 a.m. It literally gushed and leaked up until I finally went to the hospital that night at 6. So, I mean, it was a ton of fluid, which is why I also felt so ginormous with Bo because there was so much fluid in there.
Hmm.
So called the OB on call at 9 that morning and I was like, hey, my water broke. My plan is to stay at home. I want to labor here. Baby's good. You know, fluid all looked healthy. I want to stay home until I start having contractions. And she was like, well, if your water broke and you're not having contractions, I think we should come in and do a C-section. And I was like, well, I'm not doing that. And so she said, okay, well, your other option is to stay home, try everything you can until 6 o'clock tonight, and then you can come in. So I was like, okay, that's what I'll do. So we walked the block, we took a nap, we watched a movie, got our bags, everything together. Then my mom came over to watch Emerson, or she was 3 at the time. And I was having some minor contractions, but nothing significant, nothing that was going to like push labor along enough. So ended up checking into the hospital at 6 o'clock that night. And the OB comes in, the same one that was on call, and she's like, okay, well, nothing's changed. Are you ready for that C-section now? I was like, no, still not ready for that C-section. I'm having a VBAC. Baby's healthy. I'm fine. I'm going to still wait it out. And so she said, okay, well, I'll give you 2 more hours. If nothing changes, then we'll start Pitocin, which I really, really did not want. I really wanted a natural birth. The statistics with Pitocin, again, with VBAC, are that it definitely makes things more complicated and does increase the risk of you needing interventions or ending with a C-section. So I was like, okay, give me 2 more hours. If nothing changes, we can start Pitocin on a super, super low dose. So she was like, okay. 2 hours goes by, really nothing changes still. I'm like, going on the birth ball, I'm walking, doing all the things, and still just nothing's really happening. So doctor comes back in and she's like, okay, we're going to start really low dose Pitocin. It's like, okay. And I told her specifically, I said, I am a hyper responder when it comes to medications. So please start it extremely low. And I kind of got that look from her like, yeah, okay. That's what everybody says. So I started Pitocin, what they claim is low. And I went from no contractions 2 contractions every minute on the minute within 10 minutes of them starting Pitocin. So I was in excruciating pain. There was no recovery between contractions. So the labor and delivery nurse comes in, sighs, God bless him, freaking out because I can't talk. I'm like hunched over. I can't breathe between them. And he's like, she told you to start it slow. Like she's already having contractions every minute. And the nurse is like, there's no way. Like there's no way they've come that quick. Well, sure enough, I was literally having them every minute. It was horrible.
Yeah.
So I toughed it out for a while. And it finally was like, I literally couldn't recover between contractions at all. So Sai's like squeezing my hips. They're doing everything they can. And Sai's like, you need to get her an epidural. And the nurse is like, well, I can't get her an epidural unless she tells me if she wants an epidural. I literally couldn't talk at this point.
Yeah.
And he looks at her and she's like, she literally can't talk. Like, what do you want her to do? And the nurse says, well, she at least needs to like nod her head and acknowledge that she wants one. And we had a code word because I didn't want epidural to be brought up because I wanted a natural birth.
Yeah.
And so our code word, I think it was like pineapple or something stupid. And so Sai was like, Amber, I'm going to say the code word and I want you to nod your head if you want an epidural. So Sai said pineapple or whatever. And I like nodded my head. And so the nurse was like, okay, fine. So come in. I don't know if you've ever seen somebody get an epidural.
I have.
Okay. So like I told you, I was a hyper responder to the medication. The other thing that I got are ridiculous shakes. So I was shaking like uncontrolled. This was even before the epidural, like uncontrollably.
Yeah.
I think partly because of adrenaline, and then obviously they get you on IVs and hooked up to all this stuff. So I'm shaking literally uncontrollably.
Yeah.
And so the sweet anesthesiologist comes in and he's like, okay, Amber, you need to like lean forward, like kind of curve your back for me, and I need you to sit really still. Sorry, there's a fire truck outside.
That's
And
okay.
Sai's like, sit still. She can't even stop shaking. How is she going to sit still? And again, I'm still having contractions every minute. So Sai's holding me on like my legs as hard as he can to hold my legs still. The labor nurse is holding me up top, like hugging me as hard as she can. Get the epidural in. All's well. It works pretty well. I could feel some on the right side. And the left side was completely numb, which was kind of wild too. So I labored literally all night, changing positions, doing all the things. But as soon as the Pitocin like really hit and I got the epidural and they laid me down, so I was upright this whole time. I was on the birth ball doing all the things. The second they got me in the bed and laying down, Bo's heart just freaked out. So every time a contraction would hit, you would hear the monitor just start going all funky and everybody would run into the room. So this is where things kind of started getting a little eerie. So they would constantly move me in different positions. They'd try like, okay, let's go more. I could lay kind of on my side, partway on my back. That was really the only position he would tolerate. Anything else I did, his heart would just freak out. So at this point, we basically labored all night long. Every 30 minutes, they'd come in and just rotate me sides. I had a peanut ball between my legs. And he did okay. There was a lot of talk at this point of like, okay, we're getting close to where we may need to do a C-section because baby's heart's not tolerating it well. And then he'd kind of calm out for a little bit and so on. So then we had a shift change. So the initial OB that brought me in that really wanted to do a C-section went off of shift. And a new gal came on and she did a cervical check. I was pretty well progressed at this point and felt confident that if we could just keep me in one position, keep baby stable, that everything would be fine. So I was like, okay. So I went ahead and took a nap. This was at 5 in the morning. I went to sleep and she said, I'll be in an hour to come back and check on you. She didn't come back for like another, 6 hours maybe? It was a long time. And I woke up and I was like, I just had so much pressure. And it was like, you have a button when you have the epidural to give yourself like more.
Yeah.
I couldn't push the button fast enough because I could still feel that right side. And I had just so much pressure. And I was like, Sai, I think I need to push. And he was like, are you sure? I was like, something is going on. So he goes and gets the nurse. They come in and the OB comes and does a check. And she's like, oh, yep, we're having baby right now. And I'm like, okay, what station is he at? And she's like, no, like his head's like already coming out. And I was like, oh, okay. So of course, traditional hospital, get me laid on my back, start the whole thing. And I had all these techniques that I wanted to do for breathing. All my pelvic floor ladies will know what I'm talking about. I had all this stuff I wanted to do. I didn't want to lay on my back. I wanted to be able to do open glottis pushing to reduce pressure on my pelvic floor, all the things. Well, the second we went to start pushing, pretty much all shit hit the fan and Bo's heart just freaked out. So every time I go to push, his heart would just freak out on the monitor and drop way, way, way down. So I basically took 2 pushes. Bo's head came out, the doctor pushed him back in, and she said, we're going to sit here for 20 minutes and just wait. And I was like, what? All your body wants to do when you're having contractions is push. So she said, we're just going to sit here. And I was like, oh my God, okay. So she's like having just like casual conversations with us. We're letting Bo's heart like normalize on the monitor. So after 20 minutes, she looks at me and she says, Amber, you have 2 pushes to get this baby out. If you don't get him out, option 1 is I'm using forceps. I'm quoting her directly, and you will tear terribly is option 1. Option 2, you don't get him out and the forceps don't work and we're going to the OR and we're having a C-section. And his head's literally already there. And I'm like, we're not doing either of those things. So she's like, okay, on the next contraction, you're pushing. So I pushed. I mean, granted, I'd never had a vaginal birth before, but I'm just going to say I pushed the hardest I've ever pushed anything in my entire life. And Bo comes halfway out and she's like, okay, well, too fast, you're going to tear. And I'm like, you just terrified me that I have to get my baby out. So I got him halfway out and she's like, okay, on the next push, you're going to push. And so I was like, okay. So push as hard as I possibly could. There was more details I didn't add to this either, was that I also had an amnio fusion because I was completely out of fluid. So they pumped me full of a crap ton of fluid. So that part's kind of for this next piece. So the second push, I pushed as hard as I could. Bo came flying out. So we also named Bo after Bo Jackson, like the football, baseball player, you know?
Yep.
Which was fitting because Bo literally flew out of my body, hit the doctor in the chest. She almost dropped him. And because they'd pumped me full of so much fluid, and I was the only one laboring on the floor that night too, fluid went literally everywhere. And I had every nurse possible in the room. So everyone's just covered. Thank God she catches Bo. And the cord's wrapped around his head like 4 times. So he's like purple and blue. They get the cord off. He starts screaming. All is well. Baby's delivered. Okay. Put baby on my chest. Everything seems great. Everyone's so excited. Well, then I look down at the OB and she is just like zoned in on my vagina. And I'm like, that's not a good look on her face. So she immediately starts like panicking. She's like, get a cart, get the crash cart in here, get all this. And I'm like, what is happening? Thankfully, like when you have a baby, all that your really attention is on is like the baby. So like for whatever reason, I was able to like keep my heart rate level. I felt relatively safe, which sounds really weird because I knew something was wrong. So immediately Sai's like, what is happening? And the doctor was like, please don't interrupt me. Like, I got to take care of this. I'll fill you in a minute, which is almost more scary.
Yeah.
So immediately they start grabbing like all the gauze they can find. They're shoving it up inside me. You can hear the nasty suction as they're like suctioning blood out. So I'm hemorrhaging at this point. Now my brain immediately went to that my uterus ruptured. So that's what they claim is the biggest risk of having a vaginal birth after cesarean is that your uterus ruptures. So I'm assuming I'm going to the OR and I'm having a hysterectomy or I'm getting my uterus stitched up. That's where my brain went. Thankfully, that wasn't the case. What had happened is I had pushed Bo out so quickly that I actually tore out the whole backside of my vaginal wall. So backside of my pelvic floor was basically toast.
I'm cringing a little bit. Just so anybody listening, I'm cringing a little bit. This has been like, but just because I'm never gonna know what that feels like. But
thank God I had an epidural, Dave, because I almost didn't get one. And the doctor straight up told me, Amber, if you hadn't had an epidural, I'd be stitching you up totally not numbed at all right now, because there was no time. There was no time.
Yeah.
So she's panicking. She finally finds the bleed. And so she like has her hands inside and she's like, okay, we're good. I found it. And I'm like, okay. And she goes, I couldn't find it at first because I was grabbing your bladder. And I said, I'm sorry, what did you just say? And she said, yeah, you tore so bad that I could feel your bladder. And so, of course, anatomically in my head, I'm like, oh my God, like I just tore straight up like inside my body. So she gets it stitched up. I don't know how. Miracle worker, I guess. Gets the bleeding stopped. I was right under the cutoff to where I was going to need a blood transfusion. So luckily we made it out okay with that. Now, the other piece, because of this, all of the stuff going on with Bo's heart, they had to do a bunch of EKGs on him. So they were dealing with that. Then because he was born, he was technically considered uterine growth restricted, which is also really interesting because he was born at 39 weeks and 5. So it's not like he was born early, but he only weighed 5 pounds, 12 ounces. So he was very little. So they also had to do a bunch of blood sugar tests on him. So every hour they'd come in, poke his foot, check his blood sugar, do all that whole thing while I'm also like having this horribly brutal recovery. Yeah, I'll pause there. That's
I,
Bo's birth story
like
in a nutshell.
where my brain goes is because this is obviously like could it what could have been done differently.
A lot.
Okay, so my like that's maybe where you're probably gonna go
Yeah.
anyway.
Yep.
Um, Gosh, Amber, I'm like literally like shit. I probably had too much caffeine. I think like caffeine's probably a lot of my problems, but like I had
Yeah.
coffee in my pre-workout because I just got done lifting. I'm like, I don't know if that's giving me the jitters or just like
No, it was brutal. My
yeah,
poor husband, after all was said and done, and I will say before we even got pregnant with Bo, there was a lot of discussion around even having a second because Emmy's was so terrifying.
yeah,
I think that's one thing that we kind of forget in just our society is like how impactful the births are on the dad too. Like
yeah,
obviously it's physically hard on the mom, but like from a mental health and like emotional side, like it's a lot on the dad. So like we talked about that a lot before we got pregnant with Bo. And
yeah,
then of course I had round two. And so Sai was an absolute champ through the entire birth with Bo. And then once we knew I was stable and Bo was stable, he's like, I just need a minute.
yeah,
So he went outside and literally like it was middle of winter, horrible winter, like snowstorm, horrible. And he went outside and just like bawled.
yeah.
Like it was
I
freaking,
would.
yeah.
I'm about to too.
Yeah, he held it together for me and Bo and then just like
Yeah,
went out and just like lost it. My dad ended up coming because he brought colostrum for me. And so my dad, of course, like, are you okay? And he was like, no, like that was because he thought he was gonna lose both of us. Like Bo's
yeah,
heart's freaking out. So we finally then like take a deep breath when Bo's out. Well, then I'm hemorrhaging. So Sai's like, oh my God, now I'm gonna lose my wife. My kid might have a heart issue because of course they're freaking us out now that Bo has a heart issue.
yeah.
So it was a lot for both of us. Um
I just keep going to that stupid Garth Brooks song, or no, it's a Tim McGraw song. Like when like "Don't Take the Girl." Have you ever heard that
Yeah,
song?
yeah,
Like that
yeah,
shit. I like
yeah,
remember. I
yeah,
remember listening to that song as like an 8-year-old boy, and like, wait, like if I have a wife and she
yeah,
could die, like it's like freaking me out. And this is what I'm getting is like
yeah,
flashbacks of that emotional
yeah.
turmoil.
And
So I
that's
mean,
totally what it was. And that's what's so hard is like for me, this birth for Bo was supposed to be like redemptive. Like I felt
yeah,
like my body kind of failed me in reality. I know it didn't, but that's how
yeah,
I felt with Emmy. So going into this VBAC, like I felt so empowered. I felt so prepared and so educated. And I think that was one part that was kind of interesting for me too, is I questioned so many of the things that the OB did throughout Bo's delivery. And she was like shocked every time that I questioned her, or like almost like put off that I would question the recommendations. Like when we came in, I didn't want Pitocin. I was like, can we do a Foley bulb, which is another induction method? Can we do all these other things? Uh, and she was like, no, this is what we're doing. And so part of it was like eye-opening for me for women that aren't educated or aren't okay standing up for themselves, like the crap that we get put through because they're considered the experts, right? And like we know the birth outcomes in the United States are pretty terrible compared to other countries. Like
yeah,
they're horrible.
yeah.
Um
So let's talk about that a little bit because
yeah.
so I mean, first and foremost, like we have we have very much medicalized the birth
Oh,
process in the
totally.
United States. Like I am not an expert of that, but I mean my
Yep.
wife is in the same
Yep.
field as you, and she hears a lot of birth stories as well. And like it's tricky because in a lot of ways it's like I want to trust that person
Yeah.
and but like it's not as much of a collaborative process as we would like it to be, right?
Yep.
And so like talk about that a little bit. Like, yeah, like when you're asking questions, is there a way like and this is also there's so much of an ego in everything,
Yeah.
right? So, I don't want to play like devil's advocate with you. Like, do you think you could have like looking back, like how could I have managed that person's ego a little bit to get them on my side? What is there even time to do that? Because a lot of
Yeah.
times there's not even time to do that, right?
Yep. Yep.
So tell me more about that type of stuff.
So I think one of the biggest things that I always want women to remember is when it comes to finding your provider, this is another hard part about our medical system, is especially if you go with an OB like at a hospital or something like that, the person you pick more than likely will not be the person that you deliver, who
Yeah,
delivered your baby, right? So that was the case for me. My OB was not on call. Bo was due the week of Christmas. She was not there. I also learned that the gal that ended up, we technically had two OBs. The one that was there when I got um checked in at the hospital. I don't know what the word I'm trying to think of. I'm say
Yeah.
checked in. And then the gal that ended up delivering were two different people, right? The first one, who didn't have the greatest bedside manner, was very pushy on the C-section. We came to find out that she was on the very end of a 24-hour shift. So
Which
she'd
is,
literally been working for 24 hours, and we were
yeah.
like the very end of it. So this lady's exhausted.
Yeah.
Again, just another flaw in our poor medical system.
Yeah.
So that was part of it. So I think one thing was that I was educated. I felt well informed. That piece was big. I had a spouse. Obviously, Sai stood up for me too, and he was very open about what our experience was like with Emmy. We felt very like the doctors kind of were domineering to us. They didn't inform us, so we wanted to be more informed with Bo's, which we were. I think it was just that doctor was exhausted. Her personality, her bedside manner just wasn't great. But I think part of it too is knowing what kind of birth you ideally want, coming with a birth plan, but then also having backup plans. So like I knew if all shit hit the fan, which it did, that there was things that I was okay with and there was things that I wasn't okay with. So being open-minded is another thing. I think if we come in so rigid and so stuck in our own ego of like, no, this is the only thing I'm doing, there is a level of trusting that the provider does have your best interest in mind. And there are some things with birth that are very out of our control and unpredictable. So I
Yeah.
think there's some of it too, kind of them giving up their ego, finding the provider that is the right fit for you, but also me being open-minded to, you know what, this birth may not go the way that I dreamed, and that's okay. It doesn't mean I failed. It doesn't mean my baby failed. Birth is just unpredictable. I think that's the biggest thing to keep in mind.
Yeah. It's, uh, you definitely, I mean, we can talk about this later, like,
Yeah.
but I'm like internally, freaking out a little bit, but because like, I think, the man's job theoretically is very easy, but like, you still love your spouse, you still
Right.
are interacting in a way, and you have no control, right? I mean, you're an advocate. Um, and yeah, the reality of it is like, like there's a lot of variables in the process, right? And then yeah, like the setup of um the system like is not necessarily like being on shift for 24 hours as a medical professional. Like I think it's after, like 16 hours of, I think it's after maybe even 12 hours of work, like your cognitive function is
Goes
decreased,
down significantly.
right? So
Yeah.
that's really tough. And there is a certain amount of like, when it comes to, okay, we'll just have a C-section, like it's the reason, like it's very convenient, like let's
It
just
is.
get it out, right?
Yeah,
And
it's
like
super convenient.
and it's also like we kind of can guarantee the outcome, because like there's aspects of it that when you push and when you labor and there's like scary stuff that can, I mean, like what happened to you, like is
Yeah,
somewhat scary and whatnot, but there's also risks of having a C-section, right? So
totally.
um like when it comes to, all right, so like transitioning to like what you're doing now, uh
Hmm.
both, when it comes to maybe women who are prepartum but then women who are postpartum, like what are the things, like let's start with the prepartum. If you, when you're working with somebody who's maybe prepartum, like what are the things that help prepare people for the birthing experience, and what are some things that you've changed your mind on,
Oh,
if
that's a good
anything?
question. Good question. So one, I thought, so I should go back to Emmy for this first question. So when I got pregnant with Emmy, I had no friends that were pregnant. I had a couple people that were like older that I asked for advice, and their biggest things were like, go with a midwife and don't make a birth plan because you're going to forget all of that when it comes to like the real show, and you're just going to do whatever the doctors tell you. I think the complete opposite of that now. I think the more you can educate yourself, the more you can be informed, the more that you can go in with a plan, the better. I think that is key, because when it comes to labor and delivery itself, there is a lot that is in our control if we know the tools and the resources to be informed, right? I would 100% recommend hiring a doula, especially if you don't feel like, one, you can advocate for yourself, and two, if you don't feel like your spouse can advocate, because your doula can help advocate for you, for one. And two, they can help you when there's like labor stalls and things like that to change positions. They can help with just like the mental health side, like the mental support, and that stuff is huge. That's one thing that I didn't do with either of mine that I wish I would have had a doula for Bo. I think that could have definitely been really helpful for me. Um, the other things is that I want you to be really picky with who you pick as your provider. So I think a lot of us, when we go in for like our first OB or midwife appointment, we assume that we need to stay with that first provider. Like we almost like owe them something.
Hmm.
And I really want women to know that they can and should be really picky. If you don't vibe with the first provider, find another provider that vibes with you. And find someone that's going to be supportive of what you want your birth to look like. So sit down with your partner and dream about what you want your birth to look like. Is it going to be a home birth? Is it going to be a midwife center? Is it going to be a hospital birth? What do you want that to look like? And then have those conversations with your provider.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
there's providers that are going to be supportive and there's providers that are going to be like, no, you're going to do it my way or the highway.
Yeah.
And we know, like you mentioned, our system isn't really designed to support the physiological process of birth, which we know greatly impacts birth outcomes. So you really want someone that is supportive of the mom and baby connection of this is what our bodies are designed to do. Our bodies truly know what to do. And I'll support you through that, but honoring if moms want more of a hands-off physiological process of birth approach. So I think that's the first piece. What do you want your birth to look like? Do your research, get your plan, find a provider that supports you. Those are probably the biggest things I'd say.
Like how important is, I mean, I think staying calm
Yeah.
is like probably one of the most important. Like, I just we can get into because we were talking about I've got poison ivy. It's getting better, but like and I think Sai's also somebody's probably like Sai's a really cerebral human. Your
Yeah.
husband Sai,
Yep.
and I don't know what his mental woes have ever been, but like one of the things that I've really learned in the past like four since 2020 really is like learning to, and also like when was Emmy born
2019,
and when was Bo born?
2022.
Okay, so you went through COVID, like, and you came out on the other side and you had your
Yep.
second one after the fact, which, man, I have friends that had their first kid during COVID. Like, think about being in isolation, being like
Seriously.
how, like, mentally exhausting and traumatizing that would be, and how hard it would be to be like afraid
So hard. Yeah.
of, yeah,
Emmy was 8 months old when COVID hit. So it was pretty scary. I got laid off work for what? 16? No. Yeah, 4 months, right? I think I was off work for 4 months. So it was wild.
yeah,
And then that's honestly why we waited a long time to have Bo. We wanted our kids closer, but COVID was scary. Nobody
yeah,
knew, like, do you get pregnant? Do you not get pregnant? So yeah, we went through that too.
yeah. Well, and then so like, that I actually talked to my therapist about this like last week,
Yep.
and we were kind of talking about like, so you have like your conscious awareness, and then you
Mhm.
have like your mind, and then you have like your body, right? And he's like, I think the ultimate practice is like learning that your conscious attention can be directed at remaining calm while like you're mentally and physically like freaking out.
Yeah.
Like, and he kind of mentioned, my therapist mentioned, and this makes sense to me like as a PT, and also my own mental health stuff is like I just scared the shit out of myself really slowly over the course of like 9 months. And I was also like seeing people's grief and not knowing how to process emotions, which men don't know how to process emotions. Like
No,
I probably need to go cry in the next couple days because I haven't cried in a while, and it like literally getting that shit out feels good. And
it does.
I can if like I can understand Sai's desire to just have a minute and cry and like get it out, right? It literally you need to do that. But like remaining consciously okay, calm while like your mind's telling you, oh shit, like your mind's just projecting the worst out
Yep.
there. Your body's like, honestly, this is the hard part about just hearing that story too is like, okay, so you're given Pitocin, which is like forcing contractions, right? Like
Yep.
your body and your mind aren't like in harmony. Like,
No.
you know what I mean? Like they're
Yeah.
like kind of actively, you're not doing what you want to do, which is like kind of a big problem. Like
Yep.
even if it like maybe is the best thing. So I guess like that kind of takes me to like after everything, like the mental side of it, like how were you emotionally and mentally after those births, and then like how did you regain some stability or like peace of mind to some extent, right?
Yeah. So when I was postpartum with Emmy, I thought I was great. Like I recovered great physically from the C-section, and mentally I thought I was fine. Looking back after what I know now, I think being through Sai's own mental health journey, me just being in this space and growing in my own personal growth, I was not okay, but I thought I was. So I had really, really bad postpartum anxiety with Emmy, but the way that mine manifested was in insane control. So I would literally track every pee, every poop, every minute she slept, every ounce of milk she drank. I mean, her day was like military style. When my mom would watch her, I would want to report back of literally every pee, every poop, how long did she sleep, everything. If something interrupted our schedule by any means, like hanging out with our friends, doing anything that would mess up that schedule, I was like, hell no, we're not doing it. So like we missed out on so many things, but that's how I controlled my anxiety. My anxiety was in controlling everything that I possibly could. But I didn't think it was anxiety at the time. I thought I was just like being a good first time mom. I was keeping her safe. I was giving her a sleep routine, doing all the things. So that was Emmy's. Now, the other thing that I didn't really do with Emmy was I didn't process how hard her birth was. Everyone just kept telling me, well, thankfully you're safe, baby's safe, because we tell moms that all the time. So I never took the time to grieve what I thought Emmy's birth was going to be like and how traumatic that was. Like we almost lost her. And I didn't really take the time to grieve that because I was like, well, she's here now, she's healthy. And I think the other piece was I had friends that were struggling to get pregnant. So I was like, well, I can't complain. Like
Yeah.
I have a beautiful baby. How can I complain?
Yeah.
So before we got pregnant with Bo, I really had to take the time to grieve the way Emmy's birth was and recognize how much postpartum anxiety I truly had, but didn't realize it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
fast forward to Bo's, physically, I was a mess with Bo's. I was in excruciating pain for months. I practically cried every time I had to take a bowel movement because it was the most painful thing in the world. I couldn't stand and rock Bo. I ended up with prolapse, pelvic organ prolapse. So I couldn't stand and rock him. He also didn't sleep anywhere besides on me. So I slept down in our basement for basically the first 5 months. So there was the whole thing of like, it's this really weird dynamic shift too when a baby comes in of you kind of become roommates in a sense with your spouse those first few weeks. And that was really hard, not even being in the same room as Sai because
Mm.
he went back to work. And this was our choice. Like I totally chose to go down there. It worked better for our family, but that was a hard piece for me too. So I had the same thing, horrible postpartum anxiety with Bo. But this time I was actually able to like recognize it. And Sai was well aware of it. I was super open with him what was going on. So he stepped up and helped a ton. I mean, there would be so many times that I would start, you always know when I'm in a bad headspace when I start rage cleaning. So I
Yeah.
would go into like a rage cleaning mode and Sai would just come like turn me around and just like hug me. And
Yeah.
I would just start bawling.
Yeah.
And for me, crying is extremely therapeutic.
Yeah.
So for me, that was really helpful. I journaled a ton. I was super open with Sai when I needed help. And then one thing we did for me too was I hired a coach postpartum. So I hired a pelvic floor PT and strength coach that I had worked with for 6 months. And that was huge. I had someone that I felt heard, I felt seen, they helped with my recovery. It was something that I invested in myself, which obviously is something I recommend all my clients too. Having something that was for me was also very therapeutic. So
Mm.
Sai and I knew that every day he was going to help watch the kids so that I could go get my workout in. That was like a no, like I was like, there was no compromise around that. That was
Yeah.
huge for me. So yeah, I feel like it was a way harder recovery postpartum with Bo, mainly the physical side. The mental side was hard too, but I felt way more prepared and I had better resources going in the second time than I was the first time.
Yeah. I think it's well, there's preparing, but there's no. I was actually talking to one of my clients who's also like he's expecting, I think his
Yeah,
third. He's like he's like, don't take advice from anybody that you don't ask it from it, because the people giving you advice are like the people who are just like miserable. He's like,
totally.
and I'm like, yeah, I think that's pretty good advice for most things. He's like, yeah, because like, I mean, if I ask a close friend what's going on and like what I need help with, he's like, that's good advice. But like, there's, and this guy's a physician. Like he's,
Yeah,
he gets like how hard it is physiologically, and he's like, but it's like nothing you can prepare, but nothing's going to prepare you like on the other side, right? And um, postpartum depression is like, well, I just think about it this way. Like, I mean, me and you actually, so we know each other from like our business
yeah,
mentorship. Um, and like we both had like really good Aprils, and we kind of talked to each other about this, and like
yeah,
it's kind of you go through a high, and then it's like can I repeat that, right?
Yeah.
And like highs lead to lows
Yep.
usually. The big thing is just not letting them get super super low, right?
Yep.
And it makes sense from like why postpartum depression is such a like a huge thing is because well you just went through 9 months of carrying a child and hopefully having like a relatively good birth outcome. And now like your body has drastically changed. You're having to care for another human being externally, which like
Right.
as hard as it is internally, like all you got to do is eat and like the poop's not going
Exactly.
anywhere, like
Yep.
like when it's outside of the body, it's like okay, now you got to do all these other things for it
Yeah.
and like make sure it's safe. And there's a tremendous amount of like change that has occurred, which is also just a driving force of like not loss, but like change and like you said, like anxiety manifests in a lot of different ways.
Yeah.
For people who are somewhat type A, it's controlling stuff.
Yep.
For
That's
people
me.
who are maybe not quite so type A, it's just like not being able to do stuff. And I'm making broad categorizations
Yeah.
here, so
Yeah.
don't
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
but like it's almost better when we just like accept those realities and like get them out in the open. Like some of the best things that I did for my own health, for my own mental health, were just like talking,
Yeah.
like trying to find somebody, even if they weren't the best mental health professional out there, even if they weren't perfect for me. When I was like on a phone call with somebody from BetterHelp, at least I was getting stuff out, right?
Exactly.
Um, and like you said with Sai and you, like for me and Mary, I mean, the biggest thing is like we just have to talk to each other. When things are
100%.
not going well, it's because we're not like communicating with each other very well, right? And like it's usually me that's not talking.
Yeah.
But yeah, and it's hard. Like it's scary and it's hard, and you also probably need a tribe, which we've kind of moved away from that aspect of our culture where we're just not in community as much as we used to be, I think, right? Which is
Oh,
kind of good and kind of bad because I talk about this a lot with Mary. It's like, we're trying to find kind of like a church and like some community that way,
yeah.
and but also like sometimes those situations are kind of shitty anyway. So it's like, how do we
Yep.
find the right one, right?
Mhm.
But let's talk about that a little bit. Like, all right, because getting support is huge.
Totally.
Whether that be from like a coach, whether that just be family, like maybe you get somebody who's postpartum with you and like creating a support system. I don't know if like that's something you specifically help people do, but
Yep.
like I'm sure it's something you talk
Yep.
about.
Yep.
What does that look like, and how can that be beneficial for people?
I think it's super beneficial. So that's one of the big things that I do talk with all my clients about is like, what's your support system like? Do we have one? Because, and I should back up even. I think one of the biggest things that you mentioned too is like in society, when a mom has a baby, right? There's a lot of societal pressure for women to just kind of like bounce back, the stupid
Yeah,
bounce back culture. And I'm not even talking like physically, but I'm talking about just like bounce back to doing what she was doing before.
yeah,
So like the housework, the taking care of the other kids, all of those things are kind of just like assumed that women are just going to jump right back into doing those things.
yep,
So I think one of the biggest things is one, figuring out when baby is born, who's going to take care of those tasks, because those are really not things that ideally the woman should be jumping back into. So having people that do like a meal train for you, or
yeah,
you even just stocking your fridge up with tons of frozen meals is going to be huge. And then having really specific conversations with your significant other or spouse or whoever of like what it's going to look like postpartum. How much time are they taking off to help you? Obviously, we had Emmy when we had Bo. So like we planned out date nights that we were going to take Emmy on specific dates because that's another huge transition in her life. So
yeah,
like if you have another kid, figuring out, okay, what are we going to do with her? We had like special gifts that we had were activities for her to do while I was breastfeeding Bo. So setting up that stuff at home, I think, is the first thing. Can you get a house cleaner that comes once a week postpartum to help? Stuff like that to take things off of mom's plate. If you don't have a ton of family, I think is huge.
yeah,
We're really fortunate that we have tons of family in town. So like my mom, multiple times, even when I was home with Bo, would come take Emmy for like the day, so Emmy could go have a fun day with my mom, and I could just kind of like breathe with one kid for a little bit, right?
mhm,
That was huge. If you were connected with a church, I think that's an amazing way. Finding a mom's group or something like that where you can just have support, hiring a coach, whether that is like a physical coach, a PT, a mental health counselor, someone that you can just share what's going on with, because when we bottle things up, we know eventually it's going to explode
Yeah.
versus if we get it out as we go, that I think is the biggest piece. Um, and then I think the other piece is just having good friends too that have been through similar things that you trust and feel comfortable asking for their opinions on. I mean, I don't know how many women I have joined my coaching that are just like, I just need someone to talk to that's been in my shoes.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
that's huge. There's so many times when you're early postpartum and you're like, oh my God, is this normal? Like with yourself recovery wise and with baby. Like baby's not sleeping at all. Baby's cluster feeding. What the heck is going on? Is this okay? So
Yeah.
like just having someone that can be like, I've been there and it's gonna be okay, I think was super reassuring for me. So I had a couple good friends that had been in my shoes, at least when we had Bo, that I could be like, oh my God, what is happening? Is this okay? And they'd be like, yeah, that's part of motherhood. You're doing a great job. All is okay. I think that's a big piece. And for yourself, setting expectations that are realistic. So
Yeah.
ditching the whole bounce back culture, asking for help, being okay asking for help. And this is the thing that I tell everybody that I will scream from the rooftops is like, you have to take care of you too. So like
Yeah.
one thing that was non-negotiable for us was I was going to shower and get dressed every single morning in those early weeks postpartum.
Yeah.
Sounds so simple, but something as little as that, and then mom getting to sit down and have a hot meal at least once a day, like those basic life
Yeah.
things we need. I think those are something that really get um almost like praised when women don't get them. Like we see all the memes of like, you're a mom when you've never had a hot meal early postpartum, or like when
Yeah.
you haven't showered for 7 days. And it's almost like we like pump people up for that. And I'm like, how much better moms and kids and like the whole household would be if mom had her basic needs met. So
Oh,
meeting your basic needs is like top of my list for every client. Like you're showering every day, you're putting on clean clothes, you're eating a good meal, you're getting some sunshine.
yeah. The human
Like,
condition is just to like lean into like our, what is it? Misery loves company, right? So like
yes,
this
yes.
I make memes like in my content, but like I'm not like putting them out as like I'm like trying to make people like question like that type of stuff, right? Because
Yeah,
is as cliche as it sounds, it's like life is really about the basics and the
yeah,
simple stuff, and it's really hard. Like the last couple weeks, I was like, I've just been craving like something different and new, and it's like, well, that's kind of not life. Like, yes, we probably do need a vacation. Like, it's just kind of that
we all
time where
do.
me and Mary like would usually have gone on a trip or something in the last like 4 months, and we just kind of haven't, and we need to
Yeah,
we need to do that, right? And
yeah,
that's like actually a good thing to do. Looking forward to something like that is a big
totally.
piece of this, but really then it's like, and one of the things that's probably one of my hardest challenges as like a virtual, like mostly virtual, is like my rituals. Like I can get up and start working at 6:30 a.m.
Totally.
and I kind
Yep.
of do, and
Yep.
it's not good. Like,
So do I.
and I really just realized the past couple days, and with like shutting your brain off, and like, and my wife's very good at this, and it's because we're two very different people, and that's why we work. But like, she'll just watch a show. Like, there is utility in like mindless television. It's not,
Totally. I
you
agree.
can't watch it like all the time, and she doesn't. But
Yeah.
like, it'll be 8 o'clock at night, and I'm still reading like, personal development and business books, and she's watching a show, and it's like, well, no wonder I'm miserable because I'm
That's
like still
Sigh.
trying to
You're literally
improve.
Sigh.
Yeah, I'm still trying to improve myself at eight
Yep.
o'clock at night, when like what would actually be beneficial for me is to just like sit and watch the show, or or do something
Or
else.
like a for fun book.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. And I'm actually like, and I'm getting better at recognizing like my behaviors, and because you're right, like you think you're okay when really you're being like obsessive compulsive,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
which is also just, I think, the way our society is shifting, is we're like giving people more and more of these obsessive compulsive tendencies
Totally.
because of the nature of a lot of things, right? The comparison after baby is probably
Brutal.
huge, right? And I think like there's always like the bounce back culture. Like, this is the hard part about like fitness and health, is like, yes, there should be some goals and like
Yes.
landmarks, right? But like, also, direction is way more important than speed,
Yep.
right? And like, it's also like, it's such a, this is one of the hardest parts for me, is like I've got people on my roster, some people who are like very beginner lifters, and then I've got people who can squat like 600 pounds,
Right.
right? And it's like both of them need to just improve themselves, and if you just do that, and just trust that if you're getting a little bit better, things are going to work out. But I remember this one specific lady of mine who, she's an awesome lady, and she literally bought like a squat rack, and she was like doing it, and then she kept telling me like, I just see other people in your community, and they're just way stronger than me. I wonder if this is like the right thing for me. And I'm like, you are learning to squat and deadlift and bench press and move, like you
Yeah,
are doing great. Like, don't worry about what they're doing. Like you are
totally.
doing what is right for you. And but she just like couldn't shake it. Like she evidently she kind of stopped, and she did stop working with me. Um and it's because like we see somebody else that is completely different from us,
Hmm?
and we still like put ourselves like, oh, I need to be there, even though like logically it makes no sense, but emotionally it's like very frustrating. So like, how do you help women with that type of stuff?
So my first thing is I think bounce back culture is the dumbest thing in the world. So I always tell women, and when I get on calls, because I hear this a lot, I really want to get my body back. I really want to fit in my pre-baby clothes. And while that is not a bad thing, I always like to reframe it as like we're not bouncing back, we're building better. So we're building new. We're not going back to who you are not the same person that you were before you had kids. You will never get that pre-baby body back. Like it's just a fact. You will not. You've grown in so many ways that we're going to build something even better, fiercer, stronger now than you were before. So that's like the first piece that I like to tell people. And then the second thing is exactly what you said. Like everyone's journey is their own. So like when we see people on social media, I have an example myself. I offboarded a client. She graduated from my program a couple weeks ago, and she was super excited about the progress that she made. But she said, you know what? Like I really wish though I would have got abs back. She's like, I've seen your posts. Like this is weird to say, but like your abs are really nice. Like I really wanted that. And I was like, okay, pause for a second. One, I've been lifting and doing all of this stuff for like 12 years. I've been doing this
Mhm.
forever. Two, it's literally my job to work out.
Yeah.
Like this gal's a lawyer. She works tons of hours. She's what, 7 months postpartum now? I'm 16 months postpartum. And my job is literally to lift. I have a huge home gym in my garage.
Yeah.
Okay. So like my access to equipment, my time, and my job is literally to do that. So I was like, you can't compare your situation to mine. Like your progress is absolutely incredible, but people tend to see these pictures or whatever on social media without any of the context. So like context matters so much to everyone's journey. We know we only see really the highlight reel on social media, right? We're not seeing everything else that goes into it. So I think that's the big thing is like your journey is your own, and the only person you're competing against is the you of yesterday. Do
Yeah.
a little bit better than you did yesterday. And for moms particular, especially in early postpartum, like all we're trying to do is stack up little habits over time, which are eventually going to make a big difference.
Yeah.
So when I start gals out and we start talking about nutrition and exercise and things like that, I only add in like one thing at a time.
Yeah.
Like when we
This
start, I'm like, your only goal is to try and get protein 3 times a day. We're
yeah.
not counting macros. We're doing none of that.
Yeah.
3 times a day, you're eating protein. Or you know what? If we're just starting workouts, all your goal is to work out 3 times a week for this amount of time. That's it. Like we're keeping it super simple because we like to go like we jump our entire body in instead of just like doing one thing at a time. I don't know if you've read, I'm sure you've read Atomic Habits.
Yeah.
Definitely using that method of like baby steps over time are what's going to lead to change versus if we try and change our entire life, nothing's going to stick. It's like going on a fad diet. You might lose the weight, but it's all going to come back. If we
The
don't set habits in our lifestyle, they're going to go away.
Yeah. The paradox of progress is that the slower you're willing to go, the faster you
Totally.
get where you want to go, right? Because
Yeah.
the thing that is just evidently it's super apparent over time is that if you can't sustain something, you're just going to revert, right? And it's really hard. Like, I mean, I was listening to something yesterday, and it's like it's a guy who he's like, I think so much of the culture around nutrition is like you need to count your macros, you need to have these super structured plans, and it's just like anything else. It's like he's like, I think it just breeds neuroticism,
Yep.
and it makes people jump into things that are not sustainable for them, when it's like most of the time, like I'm addicted to food. Like food is
Me
probably
too.
like my number one, like it's like my number one source of comfort, right? How
Mhm.
I manage it is probably first and foremost just the coming to the realization that like I am addicted to food. Like it in a way, like I don't really have I'm addicted to Fresca and probably just like ice cream, like
Yeah.
but food, right?
Yeah.
And it's like how you manage that is be like, you're addicted to this. You need to be mindful of it. And if, because my tendency would be to overeat. Now, like, also, like, I work out hard. The hard part about it is, like, when you work out hard, like, you need to eat enough.
Yeah.
And my little 16-year-old boy, Dave, who's afraid of, being 300 pounds, which is still me, like, and being chunky, like, which is still something we should all just deal with as our inner
Yeah.
child. But, like, that kid, I'm still seeing, like, that kid in me at 35 years old, right?
Totally.
And, like, the human mind is so wild. And you can literally have somebody whose life, this is also like why money's really important, but like it also like it's just evident that like until you have like an inner peace, it matters, but it doesn't matter, right? Like
Totally.
obviously
Agreed.
it makes things easier, but like, you have to learn to just like be okay with where you are and trust like your journey. And it's okay to aspire. Like if you want abs, like that's great,
Right.
but we should probably ask why, right? Like, why do you want them? Because I don't feel confident about who I am without abs. Well, it's like what we should probably do is figure out how to make you confident about who you are without abs.
Now. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then that will probably lead you to abs, right? If you still want them, right? Because
Mhm.
at the end of the day, who like, who
Doesn't really
gives a
matter. No.
like, I mean,
Your value is not based on that by any
yeah.
means.
And if anything, like having a bigger butt is probably a better sign of athleticism than
Totally. I agree.
abs are just I mean,
Dump truck Dave
abs.
right here.
Yeah, right. Like, so I think we just get transfixed on stuff and we think it's gonna solve our problems when it's
Yeah.
like how you solve your problems is just like doing your best, and that is in a world that like continuously tells us that our best is not good enough.
Yeah.
Like that's hard, right? But
Yep.
that's kind of like what we were talking about earlier. Um, is like the stuff that people are proliferating, like the proliferation of misery on social media.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, if all your friends are putting out this stuff and your friends are kind of miserable, then stop feeding your brain with it, right? Like try to orient towards a different direction. So all right, speed round.
Yep.
Like, because I want to respect your time, but this was great. The first 20 minutes, I'm still having like a decreasing, my anxiety is like still leaving my body. But so do you have like, because you've been working out for a long time, do you
Yep.
have any like goals associated with like training? Like, is there anything you want to do, or is it just I like to be a strong mom, I care about my fitness and
I love working out.
yeah,
Sounds funny. I mean, granted, I have my days where I'm like, oh my God, I don't want to do my workout, but I
yeah,
truly enjoy it. My kids also really enjoy it. So for our family, like going to the gym and all of us working out together, like that's family time.
yeah,
And I love it. We've invested a ton of money into our home gym, and that's something we'll probably continue to do because it's just something we all truly enjoy.
yeah,
I also feel super empowered when I lift heavy. So like I just told Sai the other day, he writes all my programming. My goal is to do 15 pull-ups. That's one of my goals.
yeah,
Pull-ups make me feel badass, to be
yeah,
honest.
yeah,
Um, one of my goals was to deadlift 200 pounds postpartum. I already did that. So now we're going for 225. So I have goals of that. I've never really been someone that's like wanted to compete or anything like that personally.
yeah.
Maybe someday I will. I did see Mary do hers, and that kind of motivated me a little
Mary
bit.
did not. Mary does not give a shit about doing those. It's like she
So I
just does
kind of
it.
want.
She does it
I kind of want.
because it is a good group event. It has shown her
And
like
that's what I think is cool.
my wife could be so freaking strong.
I know
Like
she could.
but she just does not care.
Yeah.
Like she cares about she cares about showing up. It's just like for me and you, I'm gonna say it like me and you are probably motivated because it like helps us manage our anxiety.
Oh, 100%.
Like my anxiety manifests very, very physically.
Yeah.
So like and it's there's a lot of reasons for that. But like I usually work out in the afternoon, and I'm actually trying to get better about getting it in the morning, especially because my schedule's so flexible. And
Yeah.
I often just feel better for the rest of the day. It could work either way, but it helps. It's like one of those times it's like, I mean, even with this poison ivy, I kind of hinted at this. Like, so when I was really low, I had like I itched all over when I was like depressed and stuff. Like it, like I have a buddy who's a psychiatrist who's like,
Yeah.
dude, what your brain basically does is it tries to scare you and tries to make you go home and chill. And like And so it just keeps layering on like scary shit. So the first part, like I felt like significant weakness in my leg. Like
Oh,
I won't say it
wow.
was weakness, but it was like I thought my legs were like weak, right? Which also is like a fight or flight, chronic fatigue type of
Yep.
symptom. Um, and then it turned into like weird pain in my hands. And then it turned into like itchiness and like feeling itchy, and it sucked. And then also I had the urge to pee constantly, which makes sense because like if you're an animal, you just if you're afraid, you just pee your pants and
Yep.
you go away. But when you're a
Yep.
human, like the urge to pee is a really weird cyclical thing.
It is.
And you can feed it, right? You can feed
Yep.
it by trying to go all the time.
Yep. Yep.
Um, but when I was the only times that I wouldn't be feeling stuff was when I was lifting weights. And I
Yeah.
was like, because I was like focused on what I was doing, but then I had a couple panic attacks while lifting weights, and then it
Oh,
kind of like stuck. So, it's the mental health and physical health are so closely related, and like just doing your best is a huge component
I
of
mean, it makes me show up as a better mom. It makes me show up as a better wife. It makes me
yeah,
show up as a better coach to my clients. It just makes me all around a better person. And for me, it's also huge self-care. So like my workouts are something that my kids, my husband, everybody knows, like we're going to prioritize in our family. And it teaches my kids that. Like I was out doing rows yesterday and Emerson was like, Mom, I need to do my workout. She loves it. So
yeah,
like that's something that I want my kids to learn is like workout is not a punishment. Workout is not something that I have to do. It's something that I truly enjoy doing.
yeah,
Because it's one good for me, but I also just really like it. It's fun to me.
yeah.
So
I think
it's
that narrative too of it's like it's not a punishment, and
yeah.
it's honestly like doable, right? Like I
Yeah,
think so many people think that it's just one more thing that I gotta like cram into life, and then like it makes everything in my life better.
me
Like
too.
and there's been times where I have been obsessive compulsive about it, and like I think humans just undulate between those types of things. Okay, so I was looking up. It says 68% of people can do a pull up. I feel like that's way too high.
That
I'm
feels
trying.
really high.
Yeah, I feel like that's really high. But 15 would be an accomplishment. I did 14 the other day, which is a PR at my current body weight,
That's
which
good.
yeah, so the do you do weighted, like do you do like heavy doubles?
Starting so my husband runs my program, God bless him.
Yeah.
I don't have pull-ups in this block of workouts. The last block that I finished, I was doing 10 reps with 15 pounds on me. So I
Wow.
probably, if
That's
I really wanted now, could probably do 15. Yeah, I was pumped. The
that's
most I did was I added 20 pounds and I did 6, which I was like, oh, I didn't even think I could ever do that.
yeah.
I've always been like pretty good at pull-ups, but like after both the kids, especially with my prolapse with Bo, like coming back to pull-ups was a lot harder. So I'm really proud of the progress I made. And I just literally asked Sai yesterday, I'm like, can you please put pull-ups in my next block again? Because I want to really tackle 15.
Just start
Yeah,
doing them on your own. Just
I know. That's what I told him. I was
oh,
like, if
man.
you don't put them in there, I'm just gonna start doing them anyways.
They yeah,
I don't know. They just make me feel so badass and empowered when I do pull-ups. I don't know what
they're
it is.
probably one of the like, they're lifting your own body weight plus adding weight, like is a very good physical
It
task. It's like
is.
very
It makes me
practical.
feel so cool.
Yeah,
And
so
yeah, it's some like I think the other piece of it for me too is like anything that requires me to like carry weight, like I like even farmers carries like upping all of that stuff translates to so many things I do in motherhood, like carrying my kids on my back or whatever I'm doing. Like a lot of what I'm training for is also just motherhood. Like how
yeah.
often do I have Bo in one arm and then Emmy's like mom carry me. So I have like two kids and yeah,
Yeah. No, I
it's
mean, I think
training
it's
for life.
the better it's such a subtle way to think about it, but like the better prepared you are to like carry your kids, get up and down from the floor with them, like
Yeah,
the more you can be a parent. And
totally.
um it's something that, I think people kind of take for granted their capacity, and then like it starts to just decline, and then it's like, okay, well then you're less of a capable parent. And
There was this super sad story before we go that I was at the park the other day with the kids, and there was this mom there that, for the life of her, could not pick up her kid. Her kid was like, I'm gonna say maybe 2, throwing an absolute tantrum. Would like the kid like was laying in front of the swing, so the kid was like about to get hit multiple times and wanted to get on the swing, but there was obviously somebody swinging, and this mom, like physically, could not pick up her kid. And you could just see like the embarrassment written all over the mom's face. And like my mom heart was just breaking because all I wanted to go do was to go pick up her kid for her and like move her kid out of the way. But I was like, is that the right? I don't know if that's
yeah,
like the right thing to step in or not. But so this mom literally like is dragging her kid by its feet because she can't pick the kid up. And it was just like such a good reminder of like, if you can't find the motivation to work out for yourself,
Yeah.
use your kids as your motivation. Like, show up for your kids so that you can be the best parent for them. So that
Yeah.
when there is an emergency, you can pick them up. Like, this is a really extreme example, but this girl posted this reel the other day. She was running on a treadmill and she said, everyone says that they'll live for their kid, but will you train for your kid? And then
Mm.
she puts her kid on her back and she said, if your house caught on fire, could you run up to your kid's bedroom, throw them over your shoulder, and get them out of the house safely? And
Yeah.
I was like, that's really bold and like kind of a dramatic example, but it's true.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
Like,
it's,
we
I
have
mean,
to
it's,
train for life, train for parenthood.
yeah. I mean, like, there's a lot of utility in being physically fit. And
Yeah,
it's unfortunately a lot of it is about vanity, right? But like
totally.
from a practical standpoint, that's just like being strong, being capable is it is very helpful from a mental standpoint, right? And
So
feeling
many aspects of
capable.
your life.
So
Yeah.
yeah, I love it. Well, this is great. I appreciate your
Fun.
time.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
I was
pitch
honored.
yourself. Where do we find you on Instagram, and where do we find you in other places? If we
Yep.
want to.
So Instagram, it's fierce.not.fragile. TikTok is Amber Fierce Not Fragile. They're both the same pretty much on both platforms. You can find me there. And yeah, this is super fun. Honored
Appreciate
to be
you.
on here. Super
Yeah.
fun. All right.
Peace.
Talk
See
to you
ya.
later.
Bye.
Bye.